I'm here at the beautiful Estadio Metro Station in Medellin, Colombia, to introduce you to the first installment of Destinations with Doni. We have today Christine Folsom, the director, along with Aunjanue Ellis, Oscar-nominated Aunjanue Ellis, to talk to us about Fannie Lou Hamer. It's a project that Chromatic Black sponsored and made sure that the history of this freedom fighter was available to all. It's a short film, but it's a project that deserves your attention and much more time. Take a listen and let us know what you think.
I would love for Anjani to talk about her passion for telling the Fannie Lou Hamer story and the genesis thereof, and where she is now with that passion project.
Well, I moved back to Mississippi. I was raised in Mississippi, but I moved back to Mississippi about 10 years ago to take care of a family member, and it just really ordered my steps in a way that had not been before. I was just immersed in this world of the Confederacy again, and as opposed to experiencing that as a self-involved teenager or self-involved college student, I had a different eye on it now. I had a different experience, and so my fists were raised every day. And in that journey, I just started, all of this stuff that I knew about just became really active in my life. And so that a part of that was my knowledge and awareness of Fannie Lou Hamer, of Mrs. Hamer. So I said, what can I do? If it's not happening in the classroom, I certainly didn't learn anything about her when I was in elementary school, when I was in junior high school, when I was in high school. What can I do in what I do to change that as some course correction? And so I wanted to do a film about her. I reached out to some writers, reached out to some directors, reached out to everybody, and nobody wanted to do it. So I said, well, I got to do it myself. So I started writing something about Mrs. Hamer. And then Christine, who I worked with on the Clark Sisters movie that was on Lifetime and came out in 2020, and that was such a great experience. And we really have become collaborators in a very real way. And so she and I started talking, and then she got the passion too, and so we started talking last summer about doing something that really was, the idea essentially was being a proof of concept of what we would do if we are to make this into a film. So Christine, being the person that she is, applied for a grant, because I just don't think that these things can happen, but she does. And she applied for the grant, and they gave us the grant, $10,000. So she came, Chromatic Black did that. So she came to Chicago, where I was working, in October, and that weekend we filmed the short. And so now it's out in the world, and it's really an introduction to what I have been working on and writing, which is the full feature on Mrs. Hamer that we hope to make happen.
Excellent. So Christine, I see a smile there. Tell me what you're thinking as you hear Aunjanue speaking about this.
It was always interesting to hear the origin story of anything, but as I'm listening to Anjanu, it's like I see a lot of progress that has been made. We have some ways to go in terms of setting this project up, but just in terms of her starting out writing it. And I think Anjanu just completed a very sublime next draft. And it just keeps getting better because I'm like, you don't need to do anything. It's good. We can shoot this. Let's go. But she's just so like dogged in making sure that it pops on the page, and I just feel like it's really turning into something that Mrs. Hamer will be very proud of, and what seed that somehow she implanted in Ingenue, living in Mississippi and beyond, is I feel it's starting to sprout.
So for those who aren't aware, because clearly, first of all, the story really touched your heart, Aunjanue, and I'm assuming that's why you were so passionate about bringing it to life. But for those who aren't aware, what is it that they should know about Fannie Lou Hamer?
Well, it's so funny. I take for granted that everybody knows about Mrs. Hamer, and the reality is that most people don't know about Mrs. Hamer. When I started my research a couple years ago, I was in Atlanta, and I went to Barnes and Noble, and I went to one of the salespersons there, and I said, "Yeah, do you have a book about? I'm looking for a book about Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer," and they said, "Who is he?" I was like, "What?" And then, but it was very sobering for me. And it said to me, I got a job to do. I have a job to do. What's important to know about Mrs. Hamer is that, the world of the freedom rights movement and the civil rights movement, because they are two really very different things. We only have, scraped the edge of that. And we've only scraped the edge of that because of who gets to tell the stories, unfortunately. And so Mrs. Hamer is really a casualty of that. And what's important that people know at this moment right now about Mrs. Hamer is that, okay, so Congress is dealing with this John Lewis Voting Rights Act, right? So in 1964, Mrs. Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and they were just a bunch of, maids and farmers and sharecroppers from Mississippi, did not have a pot to piss in, literally. They got on a bus and they went to New Jersey, the Democratic National Convention in New Jersey, because Mississippi, as Mississippi has done and did, sent an all-white, all-male delegation to be the representatives for the state of Mississippi in the 1964 Democratic National Convention, not Republican, Democratic National Convention. And so Mrs. Hamer and this motley crew of folks from Mississippi said, no, they don't represent us. So they went to New Jersey and they said, these people don't represent us. So we need to be the ones who are seated. We are the true representatives for the state of Mississippi. And what happened is that it put the whole convention into a turmoil. Lyndon Johnson felt his presidency was threatened by Mrs. Hamer, by the efforts of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And that's all I'm going to tell you, because I want people to actually research this and find out for themselves. But the consequence of what they did meant that the Democratic Party would no longer allow all male delegations to go to the convention anymore. And they would not allow all white delegations to go to the convention anymore. So here's the thing. We live what this woman did in 1964. And the consequences and the ramifications of her efforts are what we are experiencing right now. So that's just a little bit of.
No, I love it. And see, your passion just came through as you spoke about that. And I think it is such an important story that people know. And that's why earlier, as we were talking, I think it's such an important story for Black History Month, especially, right? This is something that a lot of people are not aware of. And as you mentioned, it affects us every day in our daily lives today. So, Christine, when you hear Aunjanue speaking about that, how did that affect you? Is that the same passion that you felt when you two discussed creating this project?
Well, one of the things that Aunjanue and I, discuss about this project and how it's lensed and how it's told is that it could be one of the few civil rights story told through a female lens. So we have had a plethora of movies about the civil rights movement, civil rights heroes. So typically they're either told through the lens of the male protagonists, or through the other lens of a male director, or you could have a female director and still a male protagonist. This may be really one of the first feature films made that is strictly told through the lens of this black woman, written by a Mississippi native, Aunjanue Ellis, um, directed by a black woman who with deep roots in Mississippi. All of my dad's side of the family is from Mississippi, and one of the things I was thinking, Aunjanue, like, is that I'm probably one of the few directors who actually own property in Mississippi. How rare is that? And how that property came to me was through generations of family members who started out in Mississippi, and it started out with my great great grandfather owning 150 acres of land, and over time it just got passed down to my aunts and uncles. And what happened was, white landowners started to buy the properties away from my family members, who thought at the time whatever they were being offered was a lot of money. And so that 150 acres trickled down to 10 acres of. And then I think often about what it took my great great grandfather to accumulate that land and keep it in his family for 4 generations, all the way down to me. So I think about the legacy of my relatives, and what they went through while in Mississippi, and then a lot of them migrated to Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Louis, Cleveland, and like me, I'm a casualty of those relatives from Mississippi. So every summer, I had to go to Mississippi so they can visit all their relatives. So there's a deep connection that I've always had to Mississippi, and I didn't know what that was and what that would mean. But this is what I've been meeting Aunjanue. Like, I was just really impressed that she lives in Mississippi now, and her groundedness to it. Just, I tell Aunjanue, like, she feels like family to me because there's so many connections that we have because of the roots of our relatives.
I love it. So, my last question for you, and then after that, if there's anything else that we haven't touched on that you would like to add, you mentioned a full feature. So, where to from here?
We'll see. We'll see. We're trying to get people, advocates, producers, to help us, bring it to make it happen, to realize it. So, we thank you for wanting to feature us, because all of this helps. All of it helps. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And that was the point on our end. I think it's a very timely story, and it needs to be out there because, as we discussed, not too many people know of Fannie Lou Hamer, but they should. They should.
Yeah, I wanted to say this just real quickly. It's interesting that the words we use words like story and narrative, right? And I've been thinking about that a lot, and those words have value, of course, but they're not really reflective of what I feel is important, and that is that it's the truth. Because you can attach words like story and narrative can be easily attached with fiction. And that's not the what happened with Mrs. Hamer, who Mrs. Hamer is, and her effect on American electoral politics is not a story, it's not a narrative, it's the truth. And I think it's important to say that because of this, this active conversation, this really real battle that we're having right now surrounding critical race theory. And, Christine sent me a video that there was legislation about critical race theory in Mississippi. And, the legislation was that it would be banned out of Mississippi classrooms. And the black legislators, when there was a vote on the bill, they all walked out. So, really, critical race theory, what people think critical race theory, what it's being sold as critical race theory, isn't really what critical race theory is. But the bottom line is what they don't want is they don't want this history that they are ashamed of to be told and to be taught in classrooms. So that's what is so important about Mrs. Hamer's, what happened with Mrs. Hamer, the truth of Mrs. Hamer, and I just really want to make sure that I put that word in there, that it's the truth, it's the facts, it's history.
I like that. I like that.
All right then. Well, you guys, I have to run, but thank you so
Yes.
much for doing this. Okay.
Thank you so much.